My name is Arturo. Just last week, in the living room of the house I built with my own two hands, my only son, Marcos, and his wife, Laura, tried to trick me into signing away my entire life. They slid a stack of papers across the old wooden table, the same table where my late Elena and I shared coffee for 40 years, and told me it was for my own good. They treated me like a fool, like a piece of old furniture that was in their way. A man works his entire life, sacrifices everything for his child, only to be seen as a burden when his hair turns gray. What would you do in my place? I want you to listen to my story, really listen until the end, and then tell me, what would you have done? And please, let me know from which city you're listening. I need to know I'm not the only one who has felt this way. If my story resonates with you, subscribe to the channel. I have more to share. It all happened on a Tuesday, a day that usually smells of fresh bread from the panaderia down the street. But that afternoon, the air in my small living room in the Colonia Jardines del Sur was thick with something else, something bitter and heavy. Laura sat on the edge of the sofa, the one Elena picked out, with a smile that never reached her eyes. Marcos was next to her, looking at the floor, at the walls, anywhere but at me. Between us, on the coffee table I made from leftover cedar wood, lay the papers. They were a clean, white stack that felt like a tombstone. On the wall behind them, a photo of Elena seemed to watch, her smile a painful reminder of a time when this house was a home, not a battleground. The silence was louder than any shouting match, a heavy blanket of unspoken greed. Laura was the one who spoke first, her voice dripping with false sweetness, like honey trying to cover the taste of poison. "Suegro," she began, calling me father-in-law in that way she does when she wants something. "We were thinking with all the paperwork for your pension and the doctor, it gets so complicated. We just want to help you manage things. These are just some forms to give us permission to handle it for you, so you don't have to worry anymore." She pushed the papers a little closer to me. "It's just a formality to make your life easier." I looked at the documents, a blur of legal words I didn't recognize, but I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. I've been a carpenter and a contractor my whole life. I know when a foundation is rotten, and her words felt just like that. I picked up the papers, my hands trembling slightly, not from age, but from a deep, rising anger. "I want to read them first," I said, my voice sounding weaker than I wanted. "I need to take them to Licenciado Vargas to look over." Laura's smile finally vanished. A flash of irritation crossed her face before she smoothed it over. But it was Marcos who broke my heart. He reached over, not aggressively, but with a tired, condescending pity, and gently took the papers from my hand. "Papa, por favor," he said, his voice low and firm. "You don't understand these things anymore. Just trust us. Just sign." To be told by my own son, the boy I taught how to hold his first hammer, that I no longer understood anything. It was a slap in the face that left no visible mark, but the sting went straight to my soul. In that moment, I felt 100 years old. I looked down at my hands, at the calluses and scars that paid for his education, that built the roof over his head. I felt the weight of their judgment, the humiliation of being dismissed as senile and incompetent. They saw a frail old man who was in the way of their inheritance. So I let my shoulders slump. I let them see the defeat they expected. I nodded slowly, as if accepting my fate, and watched a flicker of relief pass between them. They thought they had won. But as I looked up, my eyes went past them, to the small bookshelf where a photo of Elena stands guard. They couldn't see what I saw, the tiny, dark lens of my old smartphone, propped up just behind her smiling face, recording every single word. The pain was real, but in its shadow, a cold, quiet plan began to take root. My life didn't begin in this house, but it feels like all the important parts of it happened between these walls. I was born a long way from here, in a small village near Pátzcuaro, in Michoacán, where the earth is rich, but opportunities are scarce. My father worked the land, and his father before him. I grew up with the smell of damp soil in my nostrils, and the ache of hard labor in my back before I was even a man. We had enough to eat, most of the time, but not enough to dream. My dream was simple, to not have my son's back break over the same patch of dirt mine did. I wanted him to use his mind, not just his hands. That dream is what pushed me onto a bus to Mexico City, with nothing but a few pesos and a change of clothes in a worn-out bag. The city was a monster, a beautiful, terrifying monster of noise and smoke and a million people all rushing somewhere. For months, I slept in crowded asterisk vicinities, sharing a single bathroom with 20 other families. I took any job I could find, mostly as a asterisk chalan, a laborer on construction sites, carrying buckets of cement and stacks of bricks under the punishing sun. It was brutal work, harder even than the fields, but I was learning. I watched the chumshino maestros, the master builders, how they measured, how they mixed, how they could create something strong and straight from a pile of dust and water. I learned by watching, by asking, by staying late and cleaning tools just to be near the work. I was hungry, not just for food, but for a trade. It was in one of those asterisk vecindades, asterisk, in the Colonia Doctories that I met Elena. She lived 2 doors down with her mother. She had a laugh that could cut through the city noise and eyes that saw past the cement dust on my clothes. She saw the man I was trying to become. She would bring me a glass of fresh agua de Jamaica on the hottest afternoons when I'd come home, my body screaming with exhaustion. We didn't have money for fancy dates. Our courtship was talks on the rooftop, watching the sunset paint the smoggy sky, and sharing a bag of chicharrones on a Sunday in the park. She believed in my dream, and soon it became our dream. She was the one who gave me the courage to stop being just a laborer and to start building for myself. One evening, sitting on that rooftop, I took her hand. It was soft, so different from my own calloused one. "Elena," I told her, my voice rough with emotion, "one day, I'm going to build you a house. Not a room, a real house. With a kitchen big enough for you to dance in, and a small patio for your geraniums. A place that is ours, where our children can grow up safe." She just smiled that smile of hers and squeezed my hand. She didn't need to say anything. I saw in her eyes that she knew I meant it. That promise became the fuel for every brick I laid, every bag of cement I carried for the next 10 years. It was a promise I intended to keep, no matter what it cost me. Slowly, I worked my way up. I became a trusted salbañil, a bricklayer, and then a camaestro de obra. People in the neighborhood started asking for me by name. "Get Arturo," they'd say. "He does good work, he's honest." I never cut corners. I built things to last. I learned to read blueprints, to manage a small crew, to bargain for materials at the lumberyard. I saved every peso I could, hiding it in a coffee can under our mattress. Each coin was a step closer to that house, to keeping my promise to Elena. My reputation was my only asset, and I guarded it with my life. It was all I had to offer, the integrity of my work. Then Marcos was born. Holding him for the first time, so small and fragile in my arms, I felt a fear and a love so powerful it almost brought me to my knees. I looked at his perfect little hands, and I swore to God, to Elena, and to him, that those hands would never know the burn of wet cement or the sting of a splintered board unless he chose it. His hands would hold pens, books, a diploma. He would be an asterisk ingeniero, a licenciado, something more. The weight of that promise was immense, but it didn't crush me. It made me stronger. It gave my work a purpose beyond just survival. I wasn't just building walls for other people anymore. I was building a future for my son. Finally, after years of saving, we bought this small plot of land. It was on the outskirts back then, nothing but dirt and weeds, but to us, it was a kingdom. For 2 years, I spent every evening after my day job, and every single weekend, building this house. I dug the foundations myself. I mixed the concrete, laid the bricks, framed the roof. Elena would bring me dinner, tacos de guisado in a basket, and sit on an overturned bucket, talking to me while I worked under the light of a single bare bulb. Our friends said I was crazy, that I was going to work myself into an early grave. But I was building our fortress, brick by sweaty, loving brick. I remember one of Marcos's first birthdays, I think it was his 4th, the house was only half built. The walls were up, but the floor was still packed dirt, and the windows were just empty holes. We didn't have money for a big party, but Elena hung streamers from the exposed ceiling beams, and we put a small cake on a stack of cinder blocks. Marcos ran around laughing, his little feet kicking up dust, happier than any kid in a fancy salon. In that moment, in our unfinished house, surrounded by the evidence of our struggle, we were a complete family. We had everything we needed. That memory is burned into my mind, a reminder of what this house was truly built with. Not just concrete, but pure, simple love. To pay for Marcos's education, the sacrifices became greater. I took on side jobs, weekend projects, anything to make extra money. I'd leave before the sun came up and get home long after he was asleep. Some weeks, I worked 7 days straight, repairing a neighbor's leaky roof, or building a new wall for a local shop. Every extra peso went into a separate bank account, the one labeled Marcos Universidad. Elena would tell me to rest, that I was doing too much, but I couldn't. I'd see his report cards, the good grades he brought home, and it was like a shot of adrenaline. I was tired, yes, my body ached constantly. But I was building his bridge out of the life I had known, and I would have carried every stone on my own back if I had to. Elena was the silent partner in all of this. She was the one who made a few groceries last, the whole week. She was the one who would sit with Marcos for hours at the kitchen table, patiently helping him with his math homework, her finger tracing the numbers in his book. She was the one who turned our humble house into a warm, loving home. She never complained about her old dress or the fact that we never took a vacation. Her joy came from seeing Marcos succeed, from the peace within our four walls. She was the mortar that held our family together, quiet, unassuming, but strong as steel. Without her, the whole structure would have collapsed. The day Marcos graduated from the university as an accountant was the proudest day of my life. I wore an old suit that was too tight in the shoulders, and I felt out of place among all the wealthy families, but my heart was bursting. When they called his name, Marcos Ramirez, I stood up and clapped so loud that people turned to look. I didn't care. That was my son. The boy whose future I had built with my own two hands was now a professional, a contador. I saw Elena crying silently beside me, tears of pure happiness. On that day, I felt like I had finally fulfilled my life's purpose. All the pain, all the sweat, it had all been worth it. But life has a cruel way of balancing joy with sorrow. A few years after that, Elena started getting sick. It started slowly, a tiredness that never went away, a cough that lingered. Then came the doctors, the tests, the words we didn't want to hear. The medical bills piled up, eating away at the little savings we had left. I would have sold the house, sold my soul, to make her better. I cared for her in the bedroom I had built for us, the same room where we had dreamed of growing old together. I held her hand, just as I had on that rooftop so many years ago, and I told her I would keep her safe. But some promises, you find, are not yours to keep. When she passed, this house, once so full of life and laughter, became an echo chamber of silence. Her scent lingered in the closets, her favorite mug sat on the kitchen counter. For months, I would wake up and start to make 2 cups of coffee before I remembered I was alone. The grief was a physical weight pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. Marcos was there, of course, but he had his own life, his own wife. The silence in this house was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of my life's partner being gone forever, and the sound of my own future shrinking down to nothing. Marcos had married Laura a year before Elena got sick. Laura was different. She came from a family with a little more money, and she never seemed to understand our life. She'd look at the furniture Elena and I had picked out with such care and call it old-fashioned. She'd make comments about how much this land was worth now, how we were sitting on a gold mine. I tried to like her for Marcos's sake, but there was a coldness in her, a calculating look in her eyes that always made me uneasy. The warmth of our family started to cool, little by little, after she arrived. The visits started to change. They used to come every Sunday for a big family meal. Then it became every other Sunday. Then just a quick visit in the afternoon. They were always busy, always had other plans. When they were here, they would talk to me like I was a child, or worse, a piece of furniture. "Are you taking your pills, Papa? Don't tire yourself out, Papa." They spoke about me in front of me, as if I wasn't there. "He seems more confused today," Laura would whisper to Marcos, loud enough for me to hear. I wasn't confused. I was heartbroken. I was watching myself become invisible in my own home. And so I think of all those years, all that work, all that sacrifice. I think of my promise to a young Elena on a dusty rooftop. I think of holding my infant son and swearing he would have a better life. I built this house not as an investment, not as a gold mine, but as a sanctuary, a legacy of love. To see that same son, the boy whose future I poured my own life into, sit at Elena's table and try to trick me out of it, it's a betrayal so deep it feels like the foundation of my whole world has cracked. He looked at me with pity and told me I didn't understand. But I understand perfectly. I understand that, in their eyes, my life's work is now just an obstacle. That attempt to trick me, the one with the papers on the table, it wasn't a sudden storm that appeared out of a clear blue sky. No, it was more like a slow, creeping dampness that gets into the walls of a house. You don't notice it at first. But, over time, it rots the foundations from the inside out, until one day the whole structure is weak and ready to collapse. The betrayal had been building for years, brick by painful brick. It started not with a shout, but with a whisper, with a change in the air right after Marcos married Laura. Before her, this house was the center of our family's world. Every Sunday, without fail, the smell of my Elena's mole or pozole would fill every room, and the sound of our grandchildren's laughter was the only music we needed. We were a family, solid and strong. The first crack appeared subtly. It was a Sunday, maybe a year after the wedding. I had spent the morning preparing the carne asada, just the way Marcos always liked it. But an hour before they were supposed to arrive, the phone rang. It was Laura. "Suegra, I'm so sorry, but we can't make it today. We got invited to a brunch with some of my boss's friends. It's really important for Marcos's career." I remember looking at the platter of marinated meat at the table Elena had set for 4 and feeling a strange new kind of silence in the house. It was the first time in his life that something had been more important than our Sunday meal. I told myself it was nothing, that I was being a selfish old man, but a small, cold seed of doubt had been planted. Soon, those important events started happening more often. A weekend trip to Valle de Bravo, a last-minute dinner party, a commitment she had forgotten to tell him about. The excuses were always polite, always wrapped in a layer of concern for their future, for their careers. The Sunday dinners became monthly, and then they just stopped. They were replaced by short, hurried visits on a Tuesday afternoon, where they would sit on the edge of the sofa, checking their watches. The conversations changed too. We used to talk about our days, about the little things. Now, the talk was always about money. "Do you know how much a house in this colonia costs now, Papa?" Laura would ask, her eyes scanning the room. "You're sitting on a fortune." Marcos would just nod, looking uncomfortable, but he never told her to stop. The worst part was what they did with the grandchildren, my Mateo and Sofia. When they were little, they used to run into my arms the second they came through the door. I'd let them help me in my workshop, giving them small scraps of wood to sand. But Laura started putting a stop to that. "I know, don't bother Abuelo, he's tired," she'd say, pulling them away. Or, "Be careful, this house is full of old things, you might break something." She was building a wall between us, a wall made of excuses. Soon, they stopped coming all together. She'd say they had too much homework or a friend's birthday party. I was being erased from their lives, and my own son was letting it happen. I was becoming a ghost in the story of my own family. I remember my 78th birthday. It was just a few years after Elena passed. For her last birthday, this house was filled with people, with music, with so much love. For mine, Marcos and Laura showed up with a small cake from the supermarket and a single candle. They sang a rushed Las Mañanitas, gave me a pair of socks, and then Laura looked at her phone. "We have to go. We have reservations at a new restaurant." They stayed for less than 30 minutes. I sat there in the quiet house with a slice of cheap cake, and I felt the full weight of my loneliness. I wasn't celebrating a birthday. I was marking another year of becoming less important, another year of fading away into the background of their busy lives. That was when I started to feel truly invisible. They would have conversations in front of me as if I wasn't there, as if I couldn't hear or understand. "We need to figure out what to do about him," Laura would whisper to Marcos, not even bothering to lower her voice. "He can't manage this big house by himself much longer. He almost forgot to take his blood pressure pill yesterday." I hadn't forgotten. I was just waiting to take it with my dinner, like I always do. But in their story, I was already senile, incompetent, a problem, a project to be managed. They were no longer talking to me. They were talking about me, a piece of furniture that needed to be moved. I watched my own son change. The Marcos the first raised, the boy who would cry if he accidentally stepped on a snail, was disappearing. At first, when Laura would make her little comments, he would flinch. I could see the conflict in his eyes. He knew it was wrong. But her influence was like water dripping on a stone. Over time, it wore him down. He stopped flinching. He started nodding. He started agreeing. "Laura's right, Papa. Maybe we should look into a smaller place for you. It would be safer." Safer for whom? I wanted to scream. For me? Or for your inheritance? But I said nothing. Arguing felt useless. It was like shouting at a wall. The man I knew was being buried under the weight of his wife's ambition. Sometimes, in the quiet of the evening, I would sit in my workshop, the one place that still felt like mine, and I would look at the small wooden car I carved for him when he was 5. I remember his little hands trying to hold the sandpaper, his face a mask of concentration as he mimicked my movements. He was so proud of that little car. "I made it, Papa! We made it!" he had shouted. How does a boy who felt such pride in creating something with his father grow into a man who wants to take away the very house that father built for him? The memory was so clear, so full of love, that it made the present reality feel even sharper, even more cruel. The distance between that little boy and the man at my table was a canyon of disappointment. Then they started talking about updating the house. It began with small suggestions. "Papa, that sofa is so worn out. We should get you a new one," Laura would say, wrinkling her nose at the piece of furniture Elena and I had saved for months to buy. Then it was the kitchen cabinets. Then the curtains Elena had sewn by hand. "It's all so dark and old-fashioned. We could really brighten this place up to increase its value." They weren't trying to make my life more comfortable. They were staging the house for a sale. They were trying to erase every trace of Elena, every memory we had built, to make it more appealing to a stranger. Each suggestion felt like they were ripping a page out of my life story. The distance became a chasm. My phone calls would go unanswered for days. When I'd finally get a hold of Marcos, his voice would be distracted, impatient. "I'm busy, Papa. Can I call you back?" He never did. The loneliness in this house became a constant companion, a cold presence in the chair where Elena used to sit. I started talking to her photo, telling her about my day, about the ache in my heart. It was the only conversation I could have where I felt truly heard. I was a father with a son, a grandfather with grandchildren, yet I was completely and utterly alone, marooned in a sea of silence they had created. One afternoon, Laura came over alone, saying she wanted to help me organize. She went through Elena's closet, pulling out dresses and putting them in black garbage bags. "You don't need all this old clutter, Suegro," she said with a bright false smile. I saw her pick up the small, embroidered shawl Elena wore on our wedding day. "This is just taking up space," she said, tossing it into the bag. "Stop," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "That was hers." She just patted my arm. "Oh, Arturo, you have to let go of the past. It's not healthy to hold on to these things." She didn't see a memory. She saw junk. And in that moment, I realized she saw me in the same way. The hints about money became more direct. They'd talk about their struggles, the mortgage on their fancy apartment, the cost of the private school for the kids. "Things are tight right now," Marcos would say, staring at the floor. "If we just had a little more capital, we could invest in a business. We could be set for life." The implication hung heavy in the air between us. The capital was this house. The capital was my life's work. They were no longer asking for my help. They were telling me that my security was the key to their comfort, and it was a price they were willing for me to pay. My home had become their emergency fund. I would see them on Laura's social media, a window into the life from which I was barred. Pictures of big family barbecues with their parents, trips to the beach, birthday parties for my grandchildren that I didn't even know were happening. In one photo, my grandson Mateo was holding up a new bicycle, beaming. Standing beside him was Laura's father. The caption read, "Best grandpa in the world." It was a knife twisting in my gut. They weren't just neglecting me. They were actively replacing me. They were building a new family story, and in this version, I had no part. I was a footnote, a forgotten chapter. Their tone shifted from patronizing to openly annoyed. The small courtesies disappeared. My questions about their lives were met with sighs. "It's complicated, Papa. You wouldn't understand." The stories I would tell about the old days, about building the neighborhood, were now an irritation. "Yes, you've told us that one before," Laura would cut in, turning to check her phone. The message was clear. My voice, my experiences, my very presence had become a nuisance. I was no longer a person to them, just a collection of repetitive stories and inconvenient needs. Once, in what felt like a moment of grace, Marcos came by himself one morning. He brought a bag of my favorite conchas from the old panaderia. For half an hour it was like old times. We sat at the kitchen table, and he asked about my health, about the leaky faucet in the bathroom. He even laughed at one of my old jokes. A little flicker of hope ignited in my chest. Maybe my son was still in there. But then his phone buzzed. It was Laura. His face changed instantly. "I have to go," he said, already standing up. "We have an appointment." The flicker of hope died, leaving behind the cold ash of reality. He wasn't his own man. He was hers. It was on one of those long, silent afternoons, sitting alone at the kitchen table, that the final, painful truth settled in my heart. It wasn't one thing. It was the empty chair at Sunday dinner, the forgotten birthdays, the grandchildren I only saw in pictures, the whispers about me being a burden. It was the accumulation of 1,000 small cuts. I looked around the room, at the walls that held 40 years of my life, of my love for Elena, of my dreams for my son, and I finally allowed myself to see the truth. To them, I wasn't a father anymore. I was an obstacle. My life, my home, my memories, they were all just standing in the way of the life they wanted. And that is why, when they finally came that Tuesday with their stack of clean, white papers, I was not surprised. Disgusted, yes. Heartbroken? Absolutely. But not surprised. Their attempt to trick me was not the beginning of the betrayal. It was the final act of a play that had been running for years. They had spent so long treating me like I was invisible, like I was senile, that they had started to believe it themselves. They saw a frail, confused old man who would be easy to fool. They underestimated me. They had forgotten who I was. They had forgotten that I am the man who built this house, and a man who builds things knows how to spot a rotten foundation. They have this image of me in their heads, you see, Arturo, the old builder, a man of simple tools and a simple mind. Good with his hands, but slow with the numbers, confused by the modern world. You don't understand these things anymore, Papa. Those words, they echo in this quiet house. They thought they were talking to a relic, a man whose time had passed, whose mind was as worn as his old work boots. They saw the calluses on my hands and assumed my brain was just as rough and simple. They looked at my modest life, at this house I built, and saw the full sum of my existence. They judged the book by its weathered cover and never bothered to read the pages. But a man who works with foundations knows that the real strength is always buried deep, hidden from view. What they don't know, what they could never imagine, is that while my hands were mixing cement and laying bricks, my eyes were always open. I spent my life watching this city grow, sprawl, and swallow the fields around it. I saw how a dusty, forgotten road could become a main avenue in 10 years. While other men spent their extra pesos on a new television or a few more beers at the cantina, I was doing something else. On weekends, I would take a bus to the farthest edges of the city, to places that were nothing but dirt, rocks, and stray dogs. Places people called Fin del Mundo, the end of the world. I wasn't looking for a drink. I was looking for the future. It started a long time ago, even before Marcos went to college. I had a small contracting job way out past Naucalpan. It was a miserable area then, no water, no paved roads. But I saw something. I saw the new highway they were planning to build nearby. I felt the city's breath on the back of my neck, pushing outward. So, with a bit of money I had saved from a big project, money Elena and I had earmarked for a new truck, I did something else. I found a man desperate to sell a small plot of land, a terreno, because he needed to move back to his village. It was cheap, almost laughably so. I paid him in cash, and we signed the papers on the hood of his broken-down car. Elena was nervous, but she trusted me. "It's for our old age, and my amor," I told her. "A little something nobody knows about, just in case." That was the first one. A few years later, I did it again, on the other side of the city, down south, near Xochimilco. Another piece of land nobody wanted, a bit swampy, but I knew the city had nowhere to grow but south. These weren't grand investments. They were small gambles, made with pocket money I scraped together by taking on extra repair jobs on Sundays. I never touched the money for Marcos's education or our daily needs. This was a separate fund, a secret garden that only Elena and I knew about. We decided early on that we would never tell Marcos, not out of malice, but out of principle. We wanted him to make his own way, to learn the value of building his own life, not waiting for one to be handed to him. We had seen what inherited money did to other families, how it turned children lazy and greedy. Our secret became a quiet promise between us. After she got sick, we talked about it one night. The medical bills were piling up, and I asked her if it was time to sell one of the plots. She took my hand and shook her head. "No, Arturo," she whispered. "That is our security. That is the proof that you were always smarter than they gave you credit for. Keep it, for a real storm. Not for this. We will face this together." She knew. She always knew. The secret wasn't just about money. It was about our partnership, a testament to a life of quiet foresight and shared trust. After she was gone, keeping that secret felt like keeping a part of her with me, honoring her last wish. It became my last line of defense. So when Laura and Marco sit here, in Elena's living room, and talk to me about how I'm sitting on a gold mine with this house, they have no idea of the irony. They are fighting over a single coin they can see, completely blind to the treasure chest buried right under their noses. They see me as a poor old man living off a meager pension, clinging to the only asset I have. They pity me. They think they are so much smarter with their university degrees and their fancy spreadsheets. They plan and they scheme for the few million pesos this house might be worth, a sum that would change their lives, they believe. They are so focused on the tree that they can't see the entire forest. They have no concept of time, of patience. They want everything now. My little plots of unwanted land, the ones I bought for the price of a used car, have been sitting there, silently, for over 30 years. The city did what I knew it would do. It grew. The dusty roads became paved streets. The neighborhoods filled up with houses, with schools, with markets. The land that was once the end of the world is now just another colonia, bustling with life. The swampy plot near Xochimilco is now 5 blocks from a new metro line. What was once worthless is now prime real estate. My patience, the one virtue they see as a sign of old age and slowness, has been my greatest financial advisor. Laura and Marcos worry about their mortgage. They complain about the cost of private school. They dream of having capital to invest. They think selling this house for, maybe 4 or 5 million pesos is the key to all their problems. They are children chasing pennies. A few weeks ago, just to know for sure, I called a real estate agent, a serious man recommended by my lawyer. I didn't tell him my name. I just gave him the locations of my 2 properties and asked for a rough valuation. I sat at this very kitchen table and listened on the phone, my hand steady. The man on the phone was professional, direct. The plot in Naucalpan, given its location near a new commercial center, is worth, conservatively, about 8 million pesos. The one in the south, near the new metro line, is even more valuable. He estimated it could sell for close to 12 million, 20 million pesos. That was the number. 20 million pesos, sitting there, quietly, under my name. A sum so large it would probably give my son and his ambitious wife a heart attack. All those years of them patronizing me, treating me like a simpleton, while I was quietly sitting on a fortune they couldn't even dream of. The humiliation I felt when Marcos took those papers from my hand, the sting of his words, it was real. It cut me to the bone. But underneath the pain, there was something else. A cold, clear certainty. The secret I had kept to honor Elena, to protect our future, was now going to serve a different purpose. It was no longer just a safety net. It was going to be my tool for justice. It was the foundation upon which I would rebuild my dignity. They thought I was weak because I was old. They thought I was foolish because I was quiet. They have no idea what a man with nothing left to lose is capable of. They see a house. I see a fortress I built with my own hands. They see a frail old man. I see the guardian of a legacy they betrayed. They think they are in control, that they hold all the cards. But the most valuable card has been in my hand the entire time, hidden from view. They were so busy trying to take the little I let them see that they never once thought to ask what might be hidden. Their greed made them blind. Their arrogance made them foolish. They underestimated the old builder. And now, the old builder is going to show them the true meaning of a solid, unshakable foundation. My plan began to form right there, as they smiled their victorious smiles, thinking they had won. It was not a plan for revenge. Revenge is a hot, messy thing. No, this was a plan for justice, the kind of justice that is cold, precise, and quiet. The kind of justice you build carefully, brick by brick, ensuring every line is straight and every corner is true. I am a builder, after all. I don't demolish things wildly. I deconstruct them with purpose, piece by piece, until only the truth remains. And the truth is, this house is mine, this life is mine. And my son has forgotten the most important lesson I ever tried to teach him. You must earn what you have. They thought the fight was about a signature on a piece of paper. They thought the prize was this house. They were wrong. The fight is about respect. It's about honor. It's about the memory of my Elena, a memory they tried to trample with their dirty shoes. And the prize isn't a house. It's my soul. It's my right to live out my final years in peace in the sanctuary I built, surrounded by the memories I cherish. They wanted to take my house to build their future, but in doing so, they have demolished their own. Their underestimation of me is their greatest weakness. Marco sees his father, the man who taught him how to ride a bike, and he can't see the man who negotiated deals with suppliers and managed crews of tough men for 40 years. Laura sees a doddering old father-in-law, a relic from a past she despises, and she can't see the man who had the foresight to buy land that is now worth a fortune. They are blinded by their own modern arrogance, this belief that anyone older is automatically irrelevant. They have mistaken quietness for weakness and simplicity for stupidity. That recording on my phone is the first brick in my new wall, but the secret fortune, that is the foundation. It gives me power they cannot comprehend. It means I am not dependent on them for anything. It means I don't need to sell this house to survive. It means I can afford the best lawyer in Mexico City if I need to. It means that when I make my move, I will be doing it not from a position of weakness or desperation, but from a position of absolute, unshakable strength. They wanted to treat me like a child, so I will have to treat them like what they are. Tenants in my house whose lease has just expired. So let them have their little moment of victory. Let them go home tonight and celebrate how they finally managed the old man problem. Let them dream of the money they will get from selling my house. Let them plan the new car they will buy, the vacations they will take. Their dreams are built on a rotten foundation, on a lie. And I have learned one thing in my long life. Anything built on a lie will eventually, inevitably, collapse, and I will not be there to catch them when they fall. A few days later, after the storm in my heart had quieted to a cold, hard stillness, I knew what I had to do. Revenge is a fire that burns the one who lights it, and I had no desire to turn my last years into a bitter inferno. I wanted peace. I wanted dignity. I wanted to honor the memory of my Elena, which they had so carelessly spat upon. So I took the bus downtown to the office of Licenciado Vargas, the old lawyer who had handled the paperwork for this house 30 years ago. I didn't go there ranting like a crazy old man. I walked in with the same quiet determination I used to have when I would start a new construction project. I had my blueprint clear in my mind. In my pocket, my old smartphone felt heavy, not with the weight of the recording, but with the weight of the final, necessary decision it represented. I was not there to destroy my son. I was there to save myself. I sat across the polished desk from Licenciado Vargas, a man almost as old as I am, and I told him everything. I didn't raise my voice. I just laid out the facts, the years of small cuts, the forgotten birthdays, the whispers, and finally, the papers on the table. Then, I placed my phone on his desk and played the recording. He listened, his face grim, his fingers steepled under his chin. When it was over, he just nodded slowly. "Arturo," he said, his voice full of a weary understanding, "this is a sad business, but you are doing the right thing to protect yourself." With his help, we began the work. The first step was a new will. It was simple and clear. My son Marcos Ramirez was to be completely and irrevocably removed. He would inherit nothing. Not a single peso, not a single brick. It wasn't an act of hate. It was an act of truth. You cannot inherit what you have already thrown away. Then we talked about the future, about what would become of my life's work. Selling everything and living off the money felt empty. My work, my savings, they were never just about me. They were about building something that lasts. So, we created a fideicomiso, a legal trust. I called it the Fideicomiso Elena Ramirez para Jóvenes Artesanos. The 20 million pesos from the sale of my secret lands would be its heart. The money would be used to give scholarships, to buy tools for young men and women from poor barrios who wanted to learn a real trade, carpentry, masonry, welding. I wanted to give them the same chance I had fought so hard for. It was a legacy Elena would have been proud of, a way to turn their greed into a garden for others. My son wanted to use my work to build his life of leisure. Instead, I will use it to build 100 futures for those who understand the value of their own two hands. The last piece was this house, the place I built for Elena, our sanctuary. It was tainted now. Every time I looked at the sofa, I saw Laura's false smile. Every time I sat at the kitchen table, I heard my son telling me I was a fool. I couldn't live here anymore, surrounded by the ghosts of their betrayal. But I would be damned if I let them have it. So I gave Licenciado Vargas the final instruction. "Sell it," I said. "Sell it as quickly as you can. Put the money into Elena's trust." I didn't need to send them an eviction notice. I didn't need to confront them. The justice I wanted was quieter, colder. One morning, they will drive by, perhaps on their way to another important brunch, and they will see the large "Se Vende" sign hammered into the front lawn. They will learn of their loss not from an angry father, but from a piece of painted wood. I have already found a small, clean apartment for rent in a quiet building in the Colonia Narvarte. It has a balcony big enough for a few of Elena's geraniums. My life is lighter now. I have shed the weight of their expectations, the burden of their disappointment. I feel a peace I haven't felt in years. They thought my value was in this house, in the money they could extract from me. They were wrong. My value was in the love I used to build it, in the integrity of my work, in the promise I kept to my wife. By trying to take the house, they lost something far more precious. They lost a father. I have lost a son, yes, and that hurts. But I have reclaimed Arturo. I am a builder, and I have spent my whole life creating things to last. My dignity is one of them.